Today, I am joined by our friend and host of Justice Matters, one of the most important political podcasts and YouTube channels going right now, and also former federal prosecutor, worked for 20 plus years in D.C. Please welcome Glenn Kirschner. Hey, Glenn, how's it going?
Hey, G, how are you?
I'm good. So it was an interesting weekend. I just got back from New York, and we heard, at least officially, that the Inspector General, Mike Horowitz of the Department of Justice, is investigating, at the very least, the Trump-Clark-Rosen situation, the coup, which listeners know well by now, that whole situation with the letter and the threat for everyone to resign en masse and the testimony that we've gotten. What does this say? Because there's back and forth right now on social media and in the mainstream media at large. Some folks think the DOJ has to be criminally investigating this, and some say we haven't seen any sign of that, which is true. And it is also true that we would be very upset if there wasn't a criminal investigation by federal prosecutors into this attempt to overthrow a duly fair, free election. What is your take on what this Inspector General and Senate Judiciary Committee investigation, at least into the Clark stuff, what does that signal to us about what might or might not be going on in the Department of Justice?
So, first of all, the Inspector General's investigation, hugely consequential, will take a long time. The Senate Judiciary hearing that they had on Saturday, we'll talk about that in a minute, hugely consequential, is now moving at light speed, apparently. Of course, the Department of Justice is investigating this. First of all, we know that the Department of Justice is investigating the insurrection, and that they are still, primarily involved in prosecuting the foot soldiers, right? What I call the bottom rung of the insurrection ladder. But they will not be turning a blind eye to or ignoring the funders of the insurrection, the organizers of the insurrection, the inciters of the insurrection. In fact, AG, you cannot divorce that from what they are investigating, indicting, and prosecuting the foot soldiers. So, of course, the Department of Justice is investigating all of that. Now, people, the reporters are saying, but we don't have any evidence or information that they're investigating that. Well, that is as it should be. Think about the Tom Barrack indictments that just dropped. All of those same reporters had no information about that, and it came out of the blue, bang. Barrack is indicted. So, of course, the Department of Justice is investigating this blockbuster information that we just got. Because what we just got, AG, is very strong evidence supporting the assertion that there is a conspiracy. There is a conspiracy between, at a minimum, Donald Trump and Jeffrey Clark. Why do I say that? A conspiracy requires two things, two elements. One, a criminal agreement between two or more people. We have evidence of that. Donald Trump told his DOJ officials, go out, tell everybody the election was corrupt, even though there's no evidence supporting that assertion, and let me take care of the rest together with my Republican allies in Congress. We now know, courtesy of, I think Katie Benner broke the story, new reporting that Jeffrey Clark, remember that name because he needs to go on the top 10 list of American traitors. Jeffrey Clark took Donald Trump up on his corrupt offer. He went back to his office at the Department of Justice. He drafted up letters to 6 states. The letter we've seen was addressed to the governor of Georgia, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate Majority Leader in Georgia, basically saying we have grave concerns about election fraud, and here is a roadmap that you can follow to throw out Joe Biden's win and nominate electors for Donald Trump. What that is the overt act, because you need an agreement between two or more people to commit crime, and then you simply need one conspirator to do one thing toward the commission of that crime. Jeffrey Rosen authoring those 6 letters, circulating those 6 letters among other DOJ leadership in preparation for sending those letters, which reportedly he never did. That's an overt act. You know, I was on with Stephanie Rule this morning. I said, let's use this as an example. And I often pull Stephanie into my hypothetical crimes. I said, Steph, let's assume you and I are going to rob a bank. I go out and get a gun. You go out and rent a car because we're going to use a rented car to rob the bank. And the next day, we decide for whatever reason to abandon our plans. We're not going to go through with it. You know what we've done? We've committed the crime of conspiracy to rob the bank, because you don't have to commit the underlying or agreed to crime to be guilty of conspiracy. At a minimum, Donald Trump and Jeff Clark are in a conspiracy, and there's no way on earth that the Department of Justice is not investigating this.
Yeah, and that's a really great example, because I want to bring up a lot of these defendants, like boots on the ground, foot soldiers in the insurrection, are being charged with conspiracy to obstruct a congressional thing, right? Even conspiracy to aid and abet those known and unknown to do the same. And they often bring up the fact that they attempted to do this. And in fact, these foot on the ground guys did do that. We delayed the verification of the certification of the election for 8 hours, 7-8 hours, right? So they actually were successful, but they put that in there to as a notation to say you don't have to be successful, but they were. And you and I have also talked about how that sets up the generals, right? The people who funded and incited and instigated this. Because if you've got a couple hundred people admitting that they aided and abetted somebody who wanted to obstruct the verification, and they did overt acts, which they lay out in the indictments to do that, that implicates people higher up, doesn't it?
It does. And here's a phrase I don't think you've ever heard me utter before. Let me take up for the funders and the organizers for a minute. Okay. Now, the generals, Donald Trump, Don Jr., Mo Brooks, Rudy Giuliani, they, in fact, expressly incited the insurrection on January 6th. Those are the generals who set the foot soldiers on the Capitol to attack it. They're all guilty. They need to be indicted. But let me take up for a minute for the organizers and the funders. If I was among the organizers and the funders, and what I knew was that we were going to have a big rally on January 6th, and I helped fund and organize the rally. And here's what the defense would be. But as a funder and an organizer, I thought Donald Trump and company were going to say, let's go and peacefully protest what's going on at the Capitol. So the funders and the organizers are going to have an out. And the out is, I didn't know Donald Trump, Mo Brooks, Rudy Giuliani, and Don Jr. were going to be as reckless and as overtly criminal as they were when they incited something that, yes, I funded and organized. This is a fact-intensive endeavor that the prosecutors have to undertake to see who should be charged among the funders and the organizers. But the insiders, AG, the insiders need to be indicted.
Yeah, there's even a chapter in Hatchet Man, which is Ellie Honig's book, about know the facts. You have to go with the facts, where there was a Gambino crime family investigation, and two guys were sent out to beat the hell out of a guy, and they got the driver to flip, and the driver said, and they shot the guy, right, instead of beating him up, hospital beating. And they flipped the driver, and the driver told the prosecutors, we were all surprised when the guy came up and started shooting, because we were just supposed to put him in the hospital, and that was the order from Gotti, right? And so therefore they couldn't go after Gotti for attempted murder, because that wasn't the intent right there, right? The intent was just to put the guy in the hospital. That's sort of exactly what's happening here with the out for people who funded the insurrection and helped organize it. And so those facts are important, and sometimes they don't go the way you want them to go, but you have to follow the facts.
Every case is a fact-intensive, unique set of circumstances. And you're exactly right. You have to follow the facts. Now, what I will say is when there is a conspiracy to, for example, scare somebody with a gun, and so that is the agreed upon crime. You can extend criminal liability to all natural and probable consequences that result from the crime you agreed to commit. And if you agreed to commit a crime with a gun and scare somebody, And some of the co-conspirators get a little over enthusiastic and they shoot the guy. I maintain as a prosecutor that because it was a natural and probable consequence of the crime agreed to, you are also on the hook for all of the crimes by all of the co-conspirators.
That's really interesting. I have a question for you about why we haven't heard about a criminal federal investigation into at least the Clark Trump thing, but we do have IG, Inspector General, and Senate investigations. And we want to mention the interesting nature of a Saturday session with the Senate. But I do have to take a quick break. Will you stay with me?
I will.
Thanks. Everybody will be right back. Hello, it's AG with the Daily Beans, and this segment of the pod is brought to you by Upstart. When you carry a credit balance month after month, especially with those high interest rates, it can feel like you're trapped in an endless cycle of debt because you make the minimum payment and the debt doesn't decrease. But you can make that final payment with Upstart so you can get ahead. Upstart is an online personal loan service that helps you pay off your debt fast. More than 500,000 people have used Upstart to consolidate high-interest credit card debt or pay off their credit cards or fund personal expenses with simple fixed monthly payments. Now, other lenders look at your credit score only, but Upstart looks at your income and your employment history because you're more than just a number. This means they can offer a smarter interest rate with their trusted partners. And with a 5-minute online rate check, you can see your rate up front for loans between $1,000 to $50,000. Upon approval of your loan, your funds can be available as quickly as one business day. So many of our friends and gig workers and comedians and artists have found themselves living off of credit cards during the past year. And so I highly recommend checking out Upstart. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today. Go to upstart.com/dailybeans. That's upstart.com/dailybeans. And please use our URL to let them know we sent you. Loan amounts will be determined based on your credit income and certain other information provided in your loan application. Just head to upstart.com/dailybeans now and get started today. It feels so good to be debt-free. Everybody, welcome back. We're talking to the host of Justice Matters, Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, we were talking a little bit before the break. You had mentioned that we have the Inspector General, known, publicly reported, investigating Trump Clark. We have the Senate Judiciary, now known, investigating Trump Clark. And what does it say to you that on Friday for 2 hours, Rosen sat with the IG, and from the New York Times, Katie Benner report, Rosen's been working with the Department of Justice for most of the year. That's a direct quote. For most of the year to get this testimony out while it was fresh in his mind, according to Rosen, or according to people who are familiar with the matter, and before any of Trump allies could sue to block it. So what does it say to you, this is massive reporting that we had a Friday and a Saturday sit down with one of Trump's appointees to discuss what went on with Clark and Trump?
So, first of all, 7 hours the Senate Judiciary Committee sat on a Saturday in August. Now, I'm going to be just as a plain old citizen, I'm going to say that's unusual. And I actually talked to some of my political friends and they said, yeah, that's unusual. So it seems to me that at least the Senate Judiciary Committee appreciates the urgency of this. And of course, the IG. When Congress investigates things, it can be publicly known, right? Because there are no grand jury secrecy rules and that sort of thing. When the Inspector General opens an investigation, it can be publicly known. Of course, what we don't know and we shouldn't know is what's going on in the DOJ, in the prosecutorial arena. But this is my strong sense, AG, from being involved in high-profile cases where I had a witness that was really important to my prosecution, and that witness was also important to some other agency. For example, if the DC government was being sued for something that the Metropolitan Police Department did, my witness in the crime might also be a really important witness in those civil investigations and matters. You know what I did 10 times out of 10? I made sure I put that person in the grand jury before that person ever testified before any other body. That goes for an IG investigation. It goes for civil suits. It goes for congressional testimony. So if I had to bet $1 of my own money, that's my betting limit because I'm not a betting man, I would bet $1 that Jeff Rosen has already appeared before a grand jury, because those prosecutors need to craft his testimony, not in an unethical way. They need to get a handle on the universe of what information he can provide in furtherance of a possible prosecution. They need to lock that into the grand jury, and then the other branches of government can do what they need to do, like Congress. So I am betting DOJ is already on top of this.
Now, why would you send your really strong evidence like the Donahue notes or the Rosen testimony or the Clark letter out to Congress if you're trying to keep it a secret?
Well, first of all, if Congress requests it and it's evidence of presidential crime, it becomes a real challenge if the Department of Justice sits on it and declines to give it over to Congress. Because let's face it, Congress is a co-equal branch of government with important oversight responsibilities. So I think it's a delicate balance that Merrick Garland has been trying to strike. Listen, I was thrilled when he said, we will not be letting anybody invoke executive privilege to try to hide what Donald Trump did in his efforts to corruptly overturn the election.
Yeah, and he said, even though we normally would, these are exigent, unprecedented circumstances, right? That's something, those letters, those notes, executive privilege, that is something we would expect an institutionalist like Merrick Garland to hold on to or to argue against giving up. So the fact that he's giving them up, that was a big clue to me that the Department of Justice is in on this.
And they're not going to give them up until they have accomplished what they need to in furtherance of their criminal investigation with an eye toward prosecution. That's why I believe DOJ is 3 steps ahead of the Senate and probably 5 steps ahead of the Inspector General's office.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that the Department of Justice would just hand these investigations off to the Senate and the Inspector General without doing anything themselves, unless they were, just maybe trying to provide cover for themselves to look apolitical by saying, well, we got criminal referrals from the nonpartisan Inspector General Horowitz and the bipartisan Senate Judiciary Committee. We couldn't ignore that. So, 6 or 1/2 dozen of the other, take your pick. But either way, I find it, for me personally, and I have no experience in any of this, I find it very hard to believe that the Justice Department wouldn't be conducting a parallel investigation. Although it is interesting that we haven't heard about a grand jury being impaneled or seen anybody like Rosen going in to testify to a grand jury. I'm assuming these grand juries are like staked out by reporters outside waiting to see people go in and out, much like we were waiting to see if Weisselberg goes in and out of the grand jury in New York. But I imagine in D.C. there's any number of grand juries, or is it grand's jury? I don't know, that are impaneled at any given moment. And there's really no way we could know if it's the one or if it's just one of many, right?
Yeah, AG, you know how many times I snuck witnesses in vehicles that had tinted windows, bringing them into the basement of either the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we have 5 grand juries sitting at all times, or over in the federal courthouse where we have 2 or 3 grand juries sitting, and they can actually cross-pollinate. The grand juries in each of those 2 buildings can return indictments in both local D.C. Superior Court and D.C. Federal Court. Really unique jurisdiction. So you know what? If a Jeffrey Rosen has already been run through the grand jury by prosecutors, and I suspect he probably has, we wouldn't know about it, and we shouldn't know about it.
Yeah, that's my main thing. People are calling for the arrest of Donald Trump for this, and before your case is solid and before you have you can't just arrest people and detain them without charging them. And that's some pretty fascist stuff, no matter how bad the criminal is. But, I feel like I see a lot of calls for Garland to step down and for him to be arrested immediately. And I feel like people are sort of, like you say, they're missing the trees in the forest for the trees, to quote you.
I'm calling for the arrest of Donald Trump, but not at this moment for inciting the insurrection or a seditious conspiracy. Those are things that still need to be investigated. What I don't understand, AG, and I don't think I've heard anybody explain it to my satisfaction, is why we haven't taken volume 2 of the Mueller report, stapled to it what's called a face sheet, which is just an application for an arrest warrant, walked into a federal judge's chambers, handed it to the judge, and said, we've got probable cause plus, and we're asking for an arrest warrant for 6 counts of obstruction of justice. 10 times out of 10, with the evidence in volume 2, a federal judge will sign that warrant That's the part that I think Donald Trump should have been arrested for on January 21st, as Mueller testified. When he leaves office, he can be indicted for these crimes. Now, I understand, I guess the counter argument is that, well, that's old news, and that would make it look like we're vindictive because nothing happened back then. Nothing could happen back then because the pinheads at OLC said you can't arrest the sitting criminal president. So I'm not persuaded by my own counter argument. But that's the part that really irks me, because there are crimes that he's committed for which he can be arrested right now, but we're letting him, recruit foot soldiers for insurrection 2.0. That's the part I don't get, because public safety is at risk. Our democracy is at risk. Why have we not moved out on other criminal charges?
You want to hear my tinfoil hat counter argument?
Please.
What if those obstruction of justice charges are part of the larger conspiracy of Donald Trump trying to subvert our elections, 2016 included? And that goes through the 2016 election, through Russia, then with the obstruction of justice, then on to the pardons, and then on to the 2020 election and the insurrection. But again, you don't, like with the Weisselberg indictment, you don't have to wait until you have everything. Right?
Bingo. I was going to say, first of all, your observation is a great one, and you probably should have been a prosecutor, because I actually do think there's an argument that it is all one big conspiracy to first acquire and then retain power unlawfully and unconstitutionally. But as you just said, not only do you not have to wait to bring all charges in one indictment, when public safety is at risk, you don't wait. You take down the investigation, you lock up the dangerous folk who are out in the community, then you work towards superseding indictments to build your case and include all of the crimes. So, yeah, I like your theory, but I still think Donald Trump should have been arrested already.
Yeah, and what was the point of getting Don McGahn's second testimony, if not to make a criminal referral and arrest Donald Trump? I don't get it. I feel like everyone's sort of like, all right, we did it, we got it, we're done, and that bugs me.
Yeah, me too.
But until I get an announcement from the Department of Justice saying they aren't pursuing those charges, I'm still going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But you're right, timing is a factor.
Yeah, and the other thing is, this still irks me. We had Michael Cohen as a co-conspirator plead guilty to campaign finance violations at the direction of and for the benefit of Donald Trump. Can somebody explain to me why Donald Trump has not been charged with those crimes? That's a ready-made case. Now, I can actually make a more compelling counter argument, and it's a little bit down in the legal weeds, but people will say, well, Michael Cohen may have pleaded guilty to something that was a little bit of an overstatement. Remember how we couldn't convict John Edwards of campaign finance violations? Because I will agree that proving that it's a thing of value, this campaign information that you could either exploit or bury, is that a thing of value statutorily? People may say, well, Michael Cohen may have pleaded guilty to more than he really could have been convicted of at trial in his zeal to provide information against Donald Trump. So I get that, but I would still have given it a go, because that's something, when you commit crimes to steal an election and then you hold up the presidential shield that you stole as protection against being charged for those crimes, you gotta give that one a try.
Yeah, and the judge told the prosecutors in that case, you either need to close this case or charge someone else, and they opted to close that case. I think that was under Berman. I could be wrong, but that doesn't preclude prosecutors from reopening things that hadn't been charged, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So anytime a prosecutorial decision is made that we don't have enough evidence to charge a case, or we don't charge a case for some reason, that decision can always be revisited.
Like, because you don't charge a sitting president, you don't indict a sitting president.
Oh, that's a perfect example. Perfect example.
Well, he's not sitting.
You have to worry about statute of limitations too, though, because most crimes carry a 5-year statute of limitations. So if you don't act in 5 years, you may lose your opportunity to charge somebody.
But you can always file the indictment under seal, sit on it. But I don't know that they did that in this particular case. But yeah, we do have the statute of limitations. Although I will say for the obstruction stuff, I would consider the dangled pardons and the execution of the pardons right before he left office as when that sort of statute of limitations would start to toll, right? So the obstruction of justice took place in 2017, which means it would expire in 2022. But if you count the pardons, which were the completion, the cherry on top of the obstruction stuff, that extends it to Christmas of 2025.
Yeah, if conspiratorial acts are continuing, then the statute of limitations doesn't even start running, right? So, I mean, and when we look back to the campaign finance crimes, remember, they were committed in 2016. But remember, Donald Trump was still writing Michael Cohen reimbursement checks from the Oval Office. So that extends the statute of limitations because it was an ongoing conspiracy at that point.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep on top of all of this. And sometimes no news is good news if they're holding it close to their chest. I appreciate your time today. Everybody, please check out Justice Matters. You must just Google it. You'll find Glenn, and follow Glenn on Twitter. Glenn Kirschner, I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, AG.
Everybody stick around. We'll be right back with the good news.